Show us the way!
Mother, please!
Every religion promises salvation, but most of them don't require you to burn your daughter alive to get there. Now, trace the pattern the Lord of Light left behind across 8 seasons. Child sacrifice, repeated death, and visions that led the wrong people toward the wrong conclusions. A red priestess who spent decades convinced she was serving a god of light, and who still couldn't tell you, at the end, whether any of it went the way the god intended. If R'hllor was a god of life and salvation, why does its entire theology run on blood? Why does every miracle have a body count attached? And why, if the Lord of Light could see the future clearly enough to resurrect the right man at the right moment, did it spend so many years sending its most devoted servant after the completely wrong people? Either the Lord of Light was bad at this, or it was never trying to do what Melisandre thought it was. Melisandre's entire arc rested on a single assumption, that she could read what the god was showing her, as the flames spoke and she interpreted. That's the loop she operated in for over a century, or maybe longer, because the necklace reveal in Season 6 told us she was ancient long before she arrived in Westeros, and she was sustained by something that wasn't natural aging. Whatever the Lord of Light gave her, it bought her enough time to watch empires rise and fall before she ever met Stannis Baratheon. And that's important, because a woman that old, that devoted, that practiced, still got almost everything wrong. Stannis was not Azor Ahai, although she was certain about it, as she saw a great victory in the flames at Blackwater, and led him into a catastrophic defeat. She burned Shireen, a child, his own daughter, to fuel a resurrection of his military campaign. Yet he died anyway, on a cold battlefield, killed by a woman who had nothing to do with fire or prophecy at all. If the visions were accurate and Melisandre was simply misreading them, that's one thing. But the pattern of her failures suggests something more deliberate. The flames showed her what she needed to see to keep moving, not what was actually true. In the books, the unreliability of fire prophecy is treated as a feature, not a flaw. Quaithe warns Daenerys that the visions in the House of the Undying aren't straightforward. Jojen Reed's green sight burns him out from the inside. Even the ghost of Highheart, one of the most ancient seers in Westeros, experiences her visions as torment, as she weeps and drinks herself through every night she survives them. Prophecy in this world never clarified anything. It only positioned people. The Azor Ahai prophecy specifically, born amidst salt and smoke beneath a bleeding star to wake dragons from stone, has fit at least 3 different characters, depending on who's reading it. Melisandre believed it was Stannis. Many book readers believe it points to Jon. Some argue it's Daenerys. The prophecy isn't broken. It's just designed to be readable by multiple people, in multiple ways, which means it can pull multiple people toward the same destination, without any of them knowing they're being steered. And Melisandre, for all her centuries of experience, never considered the possibility that the visions weren't a window, but a leash. Beric Dondarrion died 6 times, and each time Thoros of Myr brought him back, something was lost. Beric himself admits it, that he can barely remember his former life. His memories are fading, and each resurrection costs him something he can't name or recover. The show frames this as a tragedy. The books frame it as something closer to erosion. The man who comes back is not entirely the man who died, and yet R'hllor kept bringing him back, specifically and repeatedly, until he had served his final purpose, shielding Arya in the tunnel beneath Winterfell so she could reach the Night King. Thoros died before that moment, because he wasn't needed anymore. He had served his function by keeping Beric alive long enough to pass the torch to Arya, and once that was done, no miracle came for him. This is not how a merciful god operates. This is actually how a coordinator operates. Someone who keeps specific pieces on the board for specific moments, and removes them when the move is made. Jon Snow's resurrection fits this same logic as well. Melisandre brought him back, as she was convinced that he was the prince that was promised. But Jon, after coming back, was noticeably different. He was quieter, more willing to die. He told Melisandre in Season 6 that there was nothing after death. No light, no warmth, and nothing. Whatever actually came back, it was marked. And it came back just in time to reunite with Sansa, trigger the political chain that brought armies north, and eventually put Arya in a position to end the long night. Not because Jon was the hero, but because Jon's survival made Arya's survival possible. Shireen Baratheon was burned alive while she was just 8 years old. She was innocent, and still she died screaming, while her father watched and her mother looked away. The show gave Stannis a military rationale. The army was dying, the horses were dead, and he needed something. But Melisandre had been pushing toward this for a long time. She tried to get Stannis to give up Gendry much earlier, a bastard with the king's blood. Stannis refused, but she eventually got Gendry anyway. She drained some of his blood, used it to kill Robb Stark, Joffrey Baratheon, and Balon Greyjoy. 3 kings died from leeches filled with one boy's blood. Then desperation pushed Stannis further, and that's when he finally gave her his daughter. That death actually removed Stannis from the board. A man who had a genuine claim to the throne, a disciplined military mind, and enough moral seriousness to potentially hold the North together. But he was gone, dead in the snow, his army destroyed, and his legacy finished. The people who survived and eventually decided the final conflict had little to do with Stannis. His removal wasn't a tragic failure of the Lord of Light's plan. It may have been the plan. Because a living Stannis, with a legitimate claim and a surviving army, would have complicated everything that came after. One darker theory circulating in the fandom for years suggests that the Lord of Light engineered the entire Night King conflict. Not to save humanity, but to eliminate the dragons. Daenerys arrived in Westeros with 3 dragons and an army that could have conquered the continent in a season, without supernatural interference. She was, by almost any measure, unstoppable. And then the Night King killed Viserion at the Wall, turned him into a weapon of ice and death, and used him to destroy the Wall entirely, by forcing Daenerys to commit her dragons to a conflict that killed one and nearly killed another. By the time the war in the South resumed, she had 1 dragon and a broken army. The balance had shifted, and shortly after, she broke. She started burning King's Landing, which ultimately pushed Jon to kill her. If R'hllor saw all of this, which the resurrections and prophecies suggest it could, then Arya killing the Night King wasn't the end of the Lord of Light's agenda. It was just the moment that made everything else possible. The Night King died, the dragons were depleted, the Dragon Queen was destabilized, and Westeros ended up ruled by a council of lords, with no magical, fire-wielding monarchs left to complicate the future. And Melisandre walked into the battle at Winterfell, lit the Dothraki swords, spoke to Arya with exactly the words she needed to hear, and then walked out into the snow and died. Just like that. Because her work was done, and her function was complete. Melisandre spent over a century as the most devoted instrument of R'hllor in the known world, and she never once questioned whether the god's definition of saving the world matched hers. She just assumed salvation meant survival, and the Lord of Light wanted the living to win. But every miracle she was given, every vision, every resurrection, ran on sacrifice. The magic of R'hllor in the books is called fire magic, and fire magic does exactly what fire does. It burns through whatever it touches to produce light and heat for everything around it. The fuel doesn't survive because it was never supposed to. Stannis burned, Shireen burned, Beric faded, Thoros died in the cold, Jon came back wrong, and Melisandre herself finally ran out of whatever kept her upright the moment her last task was finished. Which leaves one final question sitting under everything. If R'hllor is a god of light, what was it using all that fire for? What was it building toward through 100 years of sacrifice and prophecy and precisely placed resurrections? Maybe what the Lord of Light actually wanted was a world with no more dragons, no more magical rulers, no more wildfire queens or ancient ice demons. A world that only looked like salvation from the inside. Melisandre never served a god of rescue. She served something that only knows how to speak in sacrifice, and she mistook the language for salvation. This is PlotCorn. There's always more to the story.